I'm Cassandra Reed, 35 years old, a marine researcher who's spent years studying ocean ecosystems. My grandparents left me their waterfront house bordering Olympic National Park in Washington, my anchor between expeditions. After 18 months away in Maine, tracking coastal erosion, I came back to Seattle for a family dinner. My sister stood up, grinning, and announced, "The house sold for $500,000. My family clapped, calling it a brilliant move. I snapped, "How dare you?" Before I could finish, she slapped me, shoved me toward the door, and hissed, "Get out, loser!" Everyone froze, but I stayed calm, knowing the property was locked under federal conservation laws. The next morning, my phone lit up with 25 missed calls in 30 minutes. Her voicemail shook. They caught me. I leaned back, voice steady, and replied, "Too late. Loser." What she didn't know was the legal trap waiting to snap shut. Want to know how her scheme unraveled? Do you think I should forgive or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments because sometimes one small decision can change an entire life. Looking back to 18 months ago explains why I stayed so calm during that family dinner. My family had been pressuring me for years to mortgage the property in Washington to fund their real estate ventures. My sister led the charge, always arguing that the land was wasting potential near prime coastal development areas. I refused, every time, knowing the federal easements protected it as critical marine habitat for endangered whales. But she wouldn't stop, especially after her investments tanked. She lost big on cryptocurrency trades and a failed cafe business, leaving her in deep debt. Dad and Mom covered some losses, but she needed more. "Just sign the mortgage papers," she demanded during one visit to Seattle. "It's family helping family." I saw her desperation and decided to turn it against her. I pretended to agree, saying I'd consider a preliminary contract with investors she knew. In reality, I contacted my old college friend Travis Coleman, a real estate lawyer based in Seattle. He reviewed the documents and confirmed the easements made any mortgage or development deal illegal without federal approval. This could be a setup, Travis advised over coffee. If she forges anything, we report it immediately to prevent escalation. We drafted a plan where I gave vague verbal consent but never signed official papers. Travis prepared reports for environmental agencies, ready to file if she crossed the line. My sister jumped at my fake compliance, thinking she'd won. She started contacting investors, promising quick returns on coastal property. I documented everything, emailing Travis copies of her messages. Meanwhile, I strengthened the property's protections by submitting new data on whale migration patterns to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They added stricter designations, making any unauthorized deal a clear violation. As my main research trip approached, I knew she'd act while I was gone. Travis agreed to monitor the property records remotely. "If she files a fraudulent mortgage or contract," he said, "we'll catch it early and alert the authorities." The easements weren't just paper, they were my weapon, binding the land to perpetual conservation. No investor could touch it without triggering reviews. My grandparents had enrolled it decades ago for tax benefits, but it locked out development forever. I left for Maine confident that her scheme would backfire through legal channels alone. That pressure from my sister didn't start recently. It rooted back in our childhood in Seattle, growing up in the suburbs there. Our family was all about real estate deals and flipping properties for profit. Dad led the business, buying up land to turn into condos or malls, while Mom handled the paperwork and client meetings. They raised us to value money and success above everything, pushing us toward careers that paid well. My older sister, Deborah Vaughn, fit right in from the start, helping Dad with open houses as a teen and later joining the firm full-time. She thrived on closing deals, always talking about market trends and investment returns. Lori, my younger sister, followed suit. studying business in college and interning with them during summers. But I was different. From early on, I spent weekends exploring the beaches near Puget Sound, collecting shells and watching tide pools instead of attending property viewings. My parents dismissed it as a phase, saying, "You'll grow out of it and get a real job." They mocked my interest in marine biology, calling it playing with fish when I brought home books on ocean conservation. Family dinners often turned into lectures about how my hobbies wouldn't pay the bills. "Look at Deborah," Mom would say. "She's already making commissions." Dad nodded, adding, "We need practical skills in this family." After high school, I pursued a degree in marine science, which they tolerated but never supported. Holidays brought arguments about my impractical choices, with Deborah rolling her eyes and Lori staying quiet. I volunteered at local aquariums, learning about coastal ecosystems, but they saw it as time wasted. Then came the inheritance 7 years ago. Our grandparents passed away within months of each other, leaving their waterfront house in Washington to me specifically. The place bordered Olympic National Park, with direct access to protected coastal areas. My family was furious, expecting to sell it and split the proceeds. "It's prime land," Deborah argued at the reading of the will. "We could develop it into vacation rentals." But I visited and fell in love with it, remembering how grandparents taught me to identify sea stars and monitor kelp forests. They had always emphasized preserving the coastline while settling the estate. I discovered the federal easements on the property. Buried in the deeds were agreements from decades ago, enrolling the land in perpetual conservation programs in exchange for tax breaks. They had restricted any development to keep it as habitat for endangered whales that migrated through the waters. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had designated it critical for species like gray whales, requiring federal review for any changes. This meant no mortgages or contracts without agency approval, as it could violate environmental laws. I kept it quiet at first, knowing my family would fight it. Over time, I submitted more data on whale sightings, strengthening the protections. I added observation equipment near the shore, documenting migration patterns for reports. Deborah's troubles escalated about 3 years ago. Her side investments crashed, first cryptocurrency that tanked, then a boutique she opened that closed after 6 months due to bad location. She racked up debts, and our parents bailed her out partially, but she needed more. "Let me handle a mortgage on the house," she pressed during a visit. "It's sitting there unused while I'm drowning." I refused outright, citing maintenance costs, but she kept pushing, even suggesting preliminary contracts with her investor contacts. Family meetings turned tense, with Dad backing her up. "It's for the business," he said. Mom added, "Think of your sister." Lori tried mediating but sided with them. I stood firm, knowing the easements made her plans impossible. As her desperation grew, I suspected she'd try something shady, especially with my long trip to Maine coming up. She started networking with developers, hinting at access to the property. Deborah's attempts didn't stop with those visits. They escalated as her debts mounted higher. She began calling daily, leaving voicemails about how the mortgage could clear her slate. I deleted most without responding, focusing instead on my work. One evening, she showed up with a stack of forms from her investors, insisting I review them. "It's just a preliminary step," she said. I scanned the documents and handed them back, stating firmly that I wouldn't sign. She accused me of hoarding the property out of spite. But I explained it was about honoring our grandparents' wishes. The conversation ended with her slamming the door, vowing to find another way to safeguard the site further. I ordered specialized gear for my marine studies, underwater sensors for current patterns and acoustic recorders for whale sounds. Growing them up required coordination with local conservation groups, who helped position everything without disturbing the habitat. The installation took weeks, involving trips to the house where I tested connections and calibrated data logs. I also consulted technicians for secure remote access, ensuring I could monitor from anywhere. Dad pulled me aside during a family barbecue, suggesting I reconsider. "Deborah's in over her head," he confided. Mom overheard and joined in, saying, "A little flexibility could save her business." Lori watched from afar, not intervening. I reiterated my stance, mentioning the easements in passing, but they waved it off as minor hurdles. Deborah's investments continued failing. Her latest venture, a real estate flip in downtown Seattle, fell through when buyers backed out. Creditors started calling her office, and she turned to me again for help. "One signature," she pleaded over lunch. I refused once more, citing the legal binds. She left frustrated. But I sensed her planning something behind my back. With the main project looming, I scheduled a meeting with Travis at his office. He examined recent title searches and noted unusual activity from her contacts. "We should reinforce your position," he recommended. He drafted notices to send to potential lenders, warning of the easements and potential violations. If anyone proceeded without approval, we'd report it to the proper channels right away. Travis also advised updating my insurance to cover any unauthorized access. "This protects against claims," he noted. I agreed, signing the forms he prepared. We discussed contingency plans for quick legal action as departure neared. Deborah made a last-ditch effort at Mom's birthday dinner. "Let me connect you with my investors," she offered. I declined politely, explaining the restrictions again. She rolled her eyes, but I caught her exchanging glances with Dad before flying out. I met Travis one more time to transfer monitoring access. He took detailed notes on the property setup and promised regular checks. "Any sign of improper filings, I'll alert the agencies," he assured. The 18-month assignment in Maine involved daily fieldwork on erosion sites, but I kept tabs through secure apps. Travis's updates came steadily, confirming quiet at first. Then subtle signs emerged, queries from lenders tied to Deborah's network. I prepared for the inevitable, knowing the easements would block any move. 2 days after that dinner, I drove to the house in Washington to check things firsthand. The trip from Seattle took a couple of hours, and when I arrived, yellow survey flags dotted the shoreline near the property line. They marked spots for potential docks or expansions, clearly from investors scouting the site. I pulled out my phone and took photos of every flag, noting their positions relative to the easement boundaries. I also documented tire tracks from recent vehicles and collected business cards left by the crew, back in the car. I called Travis and described what I found. He listened quietly before responding that it matched the lender queries he'd flagged. "This confirms unauthorized activity," he said, without delay. Travis contacted the local police department, filing a report for suspected property fraud. He included copies of the easements and my ownership documents, emphasizing the federal protections. The officers took it seriously, promising to investigate the survey company's involvement. By afternoon, Travis forwarded me confirmation that the report was logged, with referrals to state real estate regulators. He also notified the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about potential easement breaches. The investors, a couple from Portland looking for coastal flips, soon realized the deal was bogus. Their lawyer reached out to Travis after discovering the preliminary contract Deborah had pushed lacked my signature. They demanded explanations. And when Deborah stalled, they filed a civil lawsuit for misrepresentation and breach of contract. The suit sought damages for their time and expenses, plus punitive fees to deter future scams. They attached evidence of her promises, including emails and meeting notes. Deborah's phone started ringing off the hook from her creditors and the investors' team. She left frantic messages for Dad and Mom, but they couldn't help much. The lawsuit papers arrived at her office the next week, listing me as a witness. Travis advised me to provide affidavits detailing the easements and her unauthorized actions. I complied, sticking to facts without emotion. As the case built, Deborah's business partners distanced themselves, canceling joint ventures. One evening, my phone buzzed with her number. I let it go to voicemail at first, but curiosity won. Her voice cracked as she spoke. They caught me. She begged for me to vouch that I'd approved the contract verbally. I texted back 3 words, too late. Loser. The message felt final, cutting off her pleas. Travis updated me that the police had interviewed the survey crew, who admitted working on Deborah's referral without verifying ownership. Regulators opened their own probe into her license status. The investor's suit gained traction, with a court date set for preliminary hearings. Deborah tried rallying the family, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But Lori expressed doubts after reviewing the basics. Dad attempted to negotiate with the investors privately, offering settlements from his funds, but they refused, wanting full accountability. Mom worried about the publicity hitting local business networks. Through it all, I stayed detached, letting the process unfold. Travis handled my side, ensuring my statement supported the facts. The easements held strong, blocking any claims on the property. As word spread in Seattle's real estate circles, Deborah's reputation took hits, with clients pulling out of deals. Colleagues avoided her at industry events, and online reviews mentioned the ongoing dispute. A week after the lawsuit filing, Dad texted me to come over for an urgent talk. When I arrived at their Seattle home, the whole family waited in the living room. Mom sat twisting her hands. Lori paced by the window, and Deborah looked exhausted with puffy eyes from stress. Dad started right away, explaining they'd heard from the investor's lawyer demanding settlement. "We can fix this together," he said. Mom chimed in, describing how the news was spreading among their clients. Deborah cut to the chase, admitting she'd pushed the contract too far. "Just tell them you were okay with it," she urged. I shook my head, reminding them the easements made it impossible legally. Lori suggested a family mediator, but I pointed out that wouldn't change the facts. Dad offered to pay part of the damages from his savings if I withdrew as a witness. "It's about unity," he pressed. Mom nodded, saying the business couldn't survive the scandal. Deborah promised to cut ties with those investors if I helped smooth things over. I listened as they outlined plans to counter the claims. Travis had warned me about this kind of pressure, so I called him on speaker. He joined the conversation remotely, outlining the suit's progress. "The court has scheduled depositions," he explained. He recommended sticking to the process, as pulling back now could raise suspicions. "Continuing the civil action ensures accountability," Travis added, noting the investors sought full reimbursement plus legal fees. Dad argued it was excessive, but Travis countered that misrepresentation in real estate carried standard penalties. I agreed with him, stating I wouldn't interfere. Deborah grew agitated, accusing me of enjoying the fallout. Mom tried calming her, but the room tensed. Lori asked if there was any compromise, like a partial statement. Travis advised against it, saying half measures could complicate my position. He detailed potential outcomes, including asset freezes if ignored. I ended the call and faced them directly, refusing to budge. "This started with unauthorized actions," I said. The meeting dragged on with more pleas, but I held firm. By evening, Deborah received notice of the first hearing date. Her phone pinged with emails from partners questioning her ethics. One major client canceled a project, citing the ongoing dispute. Dad's firm lost a referral network contact who'd heard about the case through industry channels. Mom mentioned neighbors whispering at their club events. Deborah's social media filled with subtle unfollows from professional connections. The local real estate association launched a review of her practices, threatening suspension. As the suit advanced, witnesses from the survey team submitted statements confirming her instructions. The investor's lawyer pushed for discovery, uncovering her financial records. Deborah's attempts to settle privately failed when they insisted on public acknowledgement. Family friends stopped inviting them to gatherings, wary of association. Dad's deals slowed as lenders hesitated. Mom avoided her usual social circles, embarrassed by the gossip. Lori's internship offers dried up due to the family name. Deborah faced mounting bills from her own lawyer, dipping into savings. The court granted a motion for summary judgment on key points, favoring the investors. Media outlets picked up the story as a cautionary tale in Seattle business news. Deborah's license came under formal scrutiny, with hearings scheduled. The family's reputation suffered irreversible damage in their tight-knit community. Creditors tightened terms on existing loans, adding financial strain. 3 months after the initial court motions, the judge delivered the verdict against Deborah. The investors won on all counts, with the ruling highlighting her deliberate misrepresentation of the property's status. She had to pay back their full advance, plus interest, totaling over $200,000 in restitution. The court also imposed additional fines for violating state real estate regulations, draining what remained of her accounts. Deborah appealed immediately, but her lawyer warned the chances were slim given the evidence stack. In the meantime, she liquidated personal assets, selling her car and downsizing her apartment to cover the immediate payments. The association revoked her professional certification after their review, barring her from practicing for 5 years minimum. Former colleagues stopped returning her calls, and job applications went unanswered as word circulated. One investor posted a review on industry forums, detailing the ordeal without naming her directly, but leaving enough clues for insiders to connect the dots. Deborah's social circle shrank overnight. With invitations to networking events vanishing, she spent evenings alone, scrolling through profiles of people who distanced themselves. Dad's firm felt the ripple effects first. Longtime partners hesitated on joint projects, citing concerns over liability. One major contract fell through when the client referenced the case in their withdrawal letter. Revenue dipped by 30% that quarter, forcing him to lay off staff and cut bonuses. Mom's community groups whispered behind her back, and she stepped down from a board position to avoid awkward questions. Lori's career stalled too, with recruiters pulling offers after background checks flagged the family connection. The once close unit now met rarely, conversations strained by unspoken blame. I watched from afar, receiving updates through public records rather than direct contact. Travis handled the final witness confirmations, ensuring my affidavit stood unchallenged. With the case closed, I blocked their numbers one by one, starting with Deborah's. No more pleas or accusations reached me. I relocated my base to a small rental near the Maine coast, diving deeper into erosion studies without distractions. Weekends brought solo hikes along protected shores, where I analyzed data undisturbed. Professional networks expanded as I presented findings at conferences, free from family ties pulling me back. The house in Washington remained secure, its easements intact against future threats. Conservation groups praised the outcome, using it as a case study in their workshops. Protecting personal boundaries meant saying no without guilt, even to blood relatives. Valuing the environment taught me resilience, turning potential loss into lasting strength.
We're taking our rightful share of your dad's inheritance. Get out of the house. My stepmother Diane's voice crackled through the phone, dripping with spite. I felt my heart race, but kept my voice steady. Talk to my lawyer, I replied, then ended the call. My name is Sophie Palmer, and I'm a 34-year-old financial consultant in Chicago. My father passed away 3 weeks ago after a battle with cancer, leaving behind a complex web of relationships and his considerable estate. My stepmother, Diane, whom he married 5 years ago, had always resented my close relationship with him. She spent years trying to drive a wedge between us, but my father saw through her manipulations. What Diane didn't know was that my father had prepared for this exact scenario. In the months before his death, as his illness progressed, we had lengthy discussions about his estate. He witnessed how Diane's behavior grew increasingly controlling and hostile. She would try to prevent him from seeing me, claiming he needed rest, and would intercept my calls. But my father was no fool. "Sophie," he had said during one of our private meetings at his office, "I've seen how Diane treats you. I know what she's capable of, and I won't let her take what's rightfully yours." He had already begun working with his lawyer to ensure his assets would be protected and properly distributed according to his wishes. The family home where I grew up and where all my childhood memories lived was legally secured in my name months ago. The majority of his estate was carefully designated to me through ironclad trusts and legal documentation that left no room for manipulation. My father, ever the meticulous planner, had even recorded video testimonials explaining his decisions, anticipating that Diane might try to contest the will. Now, as I sat in my apartment looking at the phone, I couldn't help but smile at Diane's premature victory call. She had no idea that her attempt to bully me out of my inheritance was about to backfire spectacularly. My father's lawyer would be contacting her first thing in the morning with some very unwelcome news. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting people's own actions lead to their downfall. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop to review the estate documents one more time. The next few days would be interesting, to say the least. I grew up watching my father build his real estate business from the ground up. After my mother passed away from breast cancer when I was 12, it was just the two of us for many years. We developed a special bond. He taught me everything he knew about business and finance, which eventually led to my career choice. Despite his busy schedule, he never missed my school events or forgot to help me with homework. Those years shaped who I am today. Everything changed when Diane entered our lives. She worked as a receptionist at one of my father's properties, and within 6 months of meeting him, they were married. I was 29 at the time, living my own life, but I noticed how quickly she tried to take control. At first, it was subtle, suggesting my father was too tired for our weekly dinners or claiming he was too busy to take my calls. But over time, her true colors showed. Diane was 15 years younger than my father, and her spending habits were outrageous. She redecorated the entire house, erasing all traces of my mother's touch. She convinced my father to buy her expensive cars and designer clothes, claiming she needed to look the part as his wife. I watched with growing concern as she isolated him from old friends and business associates, always finding fault with anyone who didn't agree with her. My father started to see through her act about 2 years ago when his health began declining. He confided in me that he'd caught her going through his financial documents late at night and noticed her asking peculiar questions about his will and business holdings. That's when he started taking precautions. "I married her because I was lonely," he admitted to me during one of his chemotherapy sessions. "But I won't let my mistake hurt you, Sophie. You're my daughter, my legacy. Everything I built was meant for you." We spent his final months getting his affairs in order, making sure every detail was legally sound. He even recorded videos explaining his decisions, knowing Diane would try to paint me as a manipulative daughter taking advantage of a sick man. My father was always 3 steps ahead, even at the end. The weight of his trust in me, and his determination to protect me from Diane's greed, only strengthened my resolve to honor his wishes and stand my ground. As I looked through old family photos in my apartment that evening, I knew the real battle was just beginning, but I was ready. The morning after Diane's threatening call, I met with Richard, my father's longtime lawyer and friend, at his office. His face was grim but determined as he shared the latest developments. "Sophie, Diane's lawyer contacted me last night. They're planning to contest the will, claiming your father wasn't of sound mind when he made the changes," Richard explained, shuffling through a stack of papers. "But what they don't know is that we have everything on video." My father had insisted on recording every meeting where he discussed his estate plans, clearly stating his reasons and demonstrating his mental clarity. He'd even had his doctors document his cognitive state during these decisions. It was as if he knew exactly what Diane would try to do. "They're demanding an emergency hearing," Richard continued. "Diane's claiming she needs immediate access to the accounts for household maintenance. She doesn't realize all the utilities and bills have already been transferred to your name." I felt a surge of anger thinking about how Diane had treated my father in his final months, restricting his visitors, monitoring his phone calls, always hovering when I visited. But my father had outmaneuvered her, and now it was time to let his planning pay off. "When's the hearing?" I asked, already knowing this would be the turning point. "Tomorrow morning. They're pushing for speed, which will actually work in our favor. They haven't had time to fabricate any evidence, and we have everything documented." Richard smiled slightly. "Your father was brilliant, Sophie. He knew exactly what he was doing." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father's last days and how Diane had tried to control every aspect of his life. She'd even attempted to prevent me from seeing him in the hospital, claiming he needed rest. Little did she know that during those precious final moments, he and I had already set everything in motion. I pulled out the last birthday card he gave me, reading his message again. "Sometimes, Sophie, the best revenge is letting people trip over their own greed." Tomorrow, Diane would learn exactly what that meant. As I prepared the documents for the hearing, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about honoring my father's final wishes and standing up to the woman who had tried to come between us. The morning of the hearing arrived with a tension-filled atmosphere at the courthouse. Diane sat across the aisle with her lawyer, wearing an expensive black dress and a confident smirk. She'd even brought her adult children, probably hoping to paint herself as the grieving widow surrounded by loving family. I noticed how they whispered and glanced in my direction, clearly expecting an easy victory. "Don't let them rattle you," Richard whispered as we waited for the judge. "Everything's in order. Just let the evidence speak for itself." When Diane's lawyer presented their case, it was exactly what we'd expected. He painted me as a manipulative daughter who had taken advantage of a dying man, and Diane as the devoted wife who'd given up everything to care for my father. He even had the audacity to suggest that my father's mental state had been compromised by his illness and medication. "Your Honor," he declared dramatically, "Mrs. Palmer simply wants what her husband would have wanted, for her to maintain the lifestyle they shared and to protect the family home they built together." I felt my blood boil at the word "together." Diane had spent exactly 5 years with my father, most of which she'd spent spending his money and isolating him from his friends and family. She'd contributed nothing to the business or home he'd spent 30 years building. Richard remained calm as he stood to present our evidence. "Your Honor, I have here not only the legal documentation of Mr. Palmer's wishes, but video evidence of him explicitly stating his decisions and the reasoning behind them." The courtroom fell silent as my father's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired from his illness, but his eyes were clear and determined as he spoke. "I am making these changes to my will of sound mind and body. My daughter Sophie is the rightful heir to my estate. My current wife Diane has been provided for adequately through her prenuptial agreement, but she will not inherit my business or family home. These belong to my daughter." I watched as Diane's smirk faltered, her face growing paler with each passing minute. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat as more evidence was presented: the documented conversations, the medical evaluations, the meticulous paper trail my father had created. The judge sat forward, studying the documentation carefully. The medical reports confirming my father's mental clarity were particularly damaging to Diane's case. Then came the most devastating evidence: surveillance footage from my father's home office showing Diane searching through his files late at night, along with bank statements revealing suspicious transfers she'd attempted to make in the weeks before his death. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Richard continued, "we have evidence that Mrs. Palmer attempted to transfer significant sums from Mr. Palmer's business accounts to her personal accounts without authorization, just days before his passing." Diane's face turned from pale to crimson. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper something urgently in her ear, but she brushed him off, standing up abruptly. "He promised me everything," she burst out, losing her composure completely. "Sophie manipulated him against me. I deserve that house. I was his wife." "Mrs. Palmer, please be seated," the judge ordered sternly. "Your outburst isn't helping your case." I remained silent, watching as Diane's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her children looked embarrassed, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the courtroom. The whispers among the observers grew louder as Diane continued to protest. Richard then presented the final piece of evidence, a video recorded just 2 weeks before my father's death, where he explicitly detailed his concerns about Diane's behavior and his reasons for the estate planning decisions. The courtroom fell silent as they watched my father, weak but clear-minded, describing how Diane had tried to isolate him and control his assets. "Order in the court," the judge demanded, banging his gavel. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I'm prepared to make my ruling." I held my breath, though I already knew we had won. The extensive preparation my father had done left no room for doubt. Still, hearing the judge officially declare that all of my father's final wishes would be upheld felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. "Furthermore," the judge added, looking directly at Diane, "any attempts to contest this ruling will result in a thorough investigation into the suspicious financial activities brought to light today. Do I make myself clear?" The judge's words echoed through the courtroom as Diane slumped in her chair, finally silent. Her lawyer quickly gathered his papers, already knowing they'd lost completely. But what happened next was even more satisfying than the verdict itself. "The court also orders a full audit of all financial transactions made by Mrs. Palmer during her marriage to the deceased," the judge continued. "Given the evidence of attempted unauthorized transfers, this matter will be referred to the appropriate authorities for investigation." Diane's face drained of all color. Her children, who had been so smugly confident earlier, were now quickly leaving the courtroom, not even waiting for their mother. The carefully crafted image of the grieving widow had shattered completely, revealing the truth my father had known all along. As we left the courthouse, Richard handed me a sealed envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this after the hearing," he said quietly. Inside was a letter my father had written, along with photos of us from when I was young, standing proud in front of our first real estate project together. "My dearest Sophie," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. I knew Diane would show her true colors eventually. While I regret bringing her into our lives, I never doubted your strength or intelligence. The business is yours now, everything we built together. You were always my true partner in this journey." I felt tears welling up as I read his words, but they weren't tears of sadness. My father had given me one final gift, not just the inheritance, but the satisfaction of seeing justice served. Through careful planning and foresight, he'd ensured that the truth would prevail. That evening, as I sat in my father's study, now my study, I noticed Diane's designer bag still sitting in the corner. She would need to collect her personal belongings soon, but that would be her final visit to the house that had never truly been hers. 2 weeks after the hearing, I began the process of going through my father's belongings. Each room held memories, but his study affected me the most. Sitting at his desk, I found myself surrounded by 30 years of business records, family photos, and personal mementos. It was here that he'd taught me about real estate, showing me property assessments and explaining market trends when I was barely old enough to understand. Diane had scheduled a time to collect her things, supervised by our lawyers. As I prepared for her final visit, I discovered something interesting, a hidden compartment in my father's desk containing a journal. He documented everything: Diane's manipulation attempts, her secret phone calls, her late-night snooping through his files. He'd known exactly who she was, but had played along while protecting what mattered most. The police investigation into Diane's financial activities revealed even more than we'd expected. She'd attempted to transfer nearly $300,000 from my father's accounts in his final weeks. The detective assigned to the case found similar patterns in her past relationships. She had a history of targeting wealthy, older men, though none had been as prepared as my father. I threw myself into running the business, expanding on the foundation my father had built. The employees welcomed me warmly. Many had known me since childhood and had witnessed my father grooming me for leadership. They shared stories about how he'd proudly shown them photos of my college graduation, my first real estate deal, my successes. One evening, while reviewing some old contracts, I received an unexpected call from Thomas, one of Diane's children. "Sophie," he said hesitantly, I wanted to apologize. We knew what our mother was doing, but we didn't stop her. Your father was a good man who deserved better." His words surprised me, but they also brought a sense of validation. Even Diane's own children had seen through her act. Thomas explained that she'd pulled similar schemes before, targeting wealthy older men. My father had been different, though. He'd seen it coming and had outmaneuvered her completely. The business thrived under my leadership, and I found myself adding my own touches to my father's legacy. I established a scholarship program for aspiring real estate professionals, naming it after him. The first recipient was a young woman whose single father had sacrificed everything to support her education. It felt like coming full circle. The day Diane came to collect her belongings was tense. She arrived with 2 movers and her lawyer, looking considerably less polished than during the hearing. As she walked through the house, I noticed how she lingered in front of certain items, particularly the expensive decorations she'd convinced my father to buy. "You can take what you personally purchased," Richard reminded her firmly. "Everything else stays." He had a detailed inventory of what belonged to the estate. Diane's face tightened as she realized how little she could actually claim. During this final visit, I maintained my distance, working in my father's study while they packed. Through the open door, I could hear her muttering about family heirlooms, though none of them were actually hers. Richard stopped her several times from trying to take items that belonged to my mother or had been in our family for generations. The most satisfying moment came when she tried to claim an antique grandfather clock, insisting my father had promised it to her. Richard simply pulled out a photograph from 30 years ago, showing the clock in our living room when I was a child, long before Diane entered our lives. "Mrs. Palmer," he said firmly, "please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." The clock stayed, along with numerous other items she tried to claim. As she prepared to leave, Diane paused in the foyer. For a moment, I thought she might try to apologize or make amends. Instead, she spoke bitterly. "You think you've won, but you'll end up alone just like your father did." I stepped out of the study, facing her directly. "My father was never alone," I replied calmly. "He had me, his true family, by his side until the end. That's something you never understood and never will." She left without another word, and as the door closed behind her, I felt a profound sense of closure. The house seemed lighter somehow, as if her departure had lifted a heavy shadow. I walked through each room, touching the familiar surfaces, feeling truly at home for the first time since my father's passing. 1 year later, I sat in my father's, now my, office, reviewing our latest property acquisition. The business had grown significantly under my leadership, expanding into new markets while maintaining the integrity my father had instilled. His photo sat on my desk, a reminder of everything he'd taught me. The investigation into Diane's financial activities had concluded, revealing a pattern of fraud that stretched back years before she met my father. She faced legal consequences for her attempts to steal from his accounts during his final days. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state, her carefully crafted image of the grieving widow completely shattered. The house felt like home again. I'd preserved the elements that held family memories while updating other areas to reflect my own style. My mother's paintings once again hung in the living room, and the grandfather clock continued to mark time in the foyer, its chimes a familiar comfort. Most importantly, I'd honored my father's legacy in the way he would have wanted, not just by preserving what he built, but by building upon it. The scholarship program we'd established had already helped 3 promising students pursue their dreams in real estate development. Sometimes healing comes in unexpected forms. For me, it came through the respect and love I saw in our employees' eyes whenever they mentioned my father. They would share stories of his kindness, his business integrity, and how proud he was of me. These moments helped me understand that his legacy wasn't just in the properties or bank accounts, it was in the lives he touched and the values he instilled. Last week, I found an old photo album in his study that I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a letter dated just days before his death. Sophie, you were always stronger than you knew. Remember that success isn't just about building wealth. It's about maintaining your integrity while doing so. You've made me proud in ways I never could have imagined. The real victory wasn't just keeping what was rightfully mine. It was honoring my father's legacy by living up to the values he taught me. The business continues to thrive, but more importantly, it does so with the same principles of honesty and integrity that my father always championed. Diane's attempts to take what wasn't hers ultimately revealed the strength I inherited from my father. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about winning in court. It's about proving that goodness and truth eventually prevail.